Okay. Tonight, we're super happy to have Kaitlyn Parkins as our guest speaker. Kaitlyn is the Glass Coalition's program coordinator at American Bird Conservancy, where she works to reduce bird window collisions through education outreach, glass testing, and policy solutions. Prior to joining ABC, Kaitlyn managed the Project Safe Flight Collision Monitoring Program at the New York City Bird Alliance. They changed their name before we did. And was part of the team that worked to pass New York City's landmark bird-friendly building ordinance. Please join me in welcoming Kaitlyn Parkins.
Sure, why not? Cool. Thank you for the introduction, John. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for having me. I do a lot of work virtually, so it's really fun to have the opportunity to actually present in person for once. So yes, I am the Glass Collisions Program Coordinator at American Bird Conservancy. That means I'm a member of a 4-person team at ABC that is solely focused on reducing bird window collisions. We work hemisphere-wide. I am based in Fort Collins, but our team is located in Wisconsin, here, me in Colorado, and then in New York, and we do work everywhere. And we work to reduce collisions through public education, resource development. We train architects how to build bird-friendly buildings. We work in the realm of helping design bird-friendly buildings, consult on retrofitting. We work on policy initiatives and materials testing and development. I'll touch on each of these just a little bit. Okay, sorry. And I really want to focus this presentation on what can we do? What can each of you do? What steps can you take to reduce window collisions? But to do that, I'm going to touch a little bit on collision science and the principles of collision prevention. And then I'm going to go through a lot of different options and products that you can use to prevent collisions in your own homes. And then how we can scale up to have fully bird-friendly communities. So let's get started with the science of window collisions. First, I just want to get on the same page because I realized I use these terms interchangeably. Bird window collisions, bird building collisions, glass collisions. All of those, to me, at least how we use them, mean the same thing. These are direct, high-speed collisions that often result in death and injury to the bird that hits the window. And bird building collisions, glass collisions, usually when a bird hits a building, it's hitting glass on the building, be that a window or a curtain wall. Rarely do birds run into, the brick broadside of a building, but you never know. A collision that often comes up is the territorial collision. The bird that sees its reflection, it's pecking, it's attacking the window. This happens a lot with northern cardinals, like pictured here. This isn't really the focus of the talk today. Birds typically can injure themselves, but they don't die from this kind of collision. And the solutions to prevent this are different than the solutions to prevent collisions otherwise. If you do have territorial birds, what you need to do is entirely eliminate the reflection on that glass by covering it up with something until that bird moves on. Unfortunately, that is not a solution to the other type of window collision because no one wants to block out their glass forever. So there are better options. So I'm curious if anyone here has experienced a window collision. Raise your hand if you've ever had a bird hit your window, maybe the window of your office, or you found a bird. So for those of you that are online, feel free to put in the chat box, but almost everyone in this room has their hand up right now. I'm also curious if anybody here has ever tried anything to prevent window collisions. All right, awesome. And then keep your hand up if it worked. Iffy. And then I'm also just curious if anyone remembers the very first time they experienced a window collision. For the very first time, a couple of you. Well, this is my introduction to window collisions. This is the childhood home that I grew up in. I spent a ton of time at this dining room table in front of that beautiful picture window. There was water out front. Often my stepmother would have a bird feeder right in front of it. And I remember this first time I was sitting there and I heard a loud thunk and I realized that a bird had hit the window and I ran out and it was a northern cardinal and that bird didn't make it. The prevailing attitude in my house at the time, at least, was really like, oh, birds are stupid. This happens. Sometimes they die, but usually they fly away and they're fine. And it just wasn't really something I considered. To me, it was this rare one-off event that happened occasionally, but it's hard to imagine the scale at which this must be happening for every person in this room and almost every room I talk to have had that experience before. And that scale is actually quite large. So in 2014, Dr. Scott Loss at the Smithsonian estimated that up to 1 billion birds die from collisions with windows every year in the US alone. So not in Canada, not in Mexico, not in South America, 1 billion birds every single year. And that is a huge number, but we actually think that that number at this point is quite low for a couple reasons. One, the data that he used was primarily from carcass surveys. So these are people going out and picking up birds off the sidewalk. And we know that many carcasses are taken by predators before they're found. So that could be feral and free-roaming cats, squirrels. We've seen chipmunks take birds. I was told that in Maine, collision monitors have to race the gulls to the dead birds because the gulls learn where the birds hit windows and they perch on those buildings so that they can snatch the carcasses before they're found. And it didn't include birds that were injured and taken to rehabilitation centers or birds that maybe weren't found immediately. So recent research has revised those numbers. There's a couple of studies that came out with some people directly observing panes of glass and video camera monitoring that showed that less than 10% of birds that hit windows leave evidence behind to be found. The vast majority of these birds fly away almost immediately or disappear almost immediately. And that begs the question, what happens to the birds that don't die immediately? There's this thought, oh, a couple birds hit my window, but they always survive and fly off later. What actually happens to those birds? And I started a project when I worked at New York City Bird Alliance, along with a graduate student from Fordham University and a student at Stony Brook. And we looked at rehabilitation outcomes for collision victims to start trying to pick away at this question. So we examined over 3,000 rehabilitation records of window collision victims from 6 states in the northeastern US. We found a couple things. One, these collisions tend to be gradually lethal. So these birds don't tend to die immediately. It takes them a couple of days, and every day that they're in rehab, more of them could die. Usually their trauma or their injuries are head traumas and concussions. And we found that mass was correlated with release rate. So bigger birds were more likely to survive to be released, and smaller birds were more likely to die or be euthanized. And the big thing that we found was that 60% of patients died in care. So 60% of these birds that were taken to rehabbers that got the best possible care, they got anti-inflammatories, they had the best chance, and still 60% of those birds died. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means that over 1 billion birds die each year from collisions because Dr. Loss excluded rehab birds from his data set. So if we add those birds that died back in, we get a number over 1 billion birds a year. We also know that this is just birds that are receiving the best standard of care. There are still unknown outcomes for birds that survive and are not taken into care. And it is very possible that those birds are less injured, so more of them survive, but they also are at risk from predators. There's so many things that could happen to them during their recovery. And so we still don't quite know the answer to this question because, as you can imagine, that's really hard to test. And then, of course, there's possible indirect effects on the birds that do survive. So a bird that survives, does it have the same reproductive rate in the wild? Does it still complete its migration, or is migration disrupted and thus the breeding season is disrupted? And there are researchers that are looking and trying to answer these questions now. So hopefully we'll have some more answers in the future. But I think the main takeaway that we wanted from this paper is really, one, it's a myth that most of these birds are surviving. If a bird is hitting your window and flying away, that doesn't mean it's okay. And also, this is really an issue that requires prevention. We can't rehab our way out of this issue. We can't just treat the birds that are injured and think that this is fine. This is a prevention thing. But the really cool thing about working on collisions, what I love about working on collisions, is that we have the solutions. We know what the answers are. We know how to prevent this. This isn't, there's so many overwhelming issues in the world today that are really hard to wrap our heads around, and we're not sure how to solve them. This is solvable, and every single person here can take action to work towards that right now. So, gonna go into the background. We're gonna dispel some myths. If I ask you, which of these two buildings is worse for birds? My guess, who thinks, I'm just gonna ask because I have you here, it's easy in person. Who thinks the picture on the right? Who thinks the picture on the left? More hands, okay. This is a trick question. Both of these buildings are really, really bad for birds. And there is this myth that window collisions, that bird collisions are associated with skyscrapers, with tall buildings in cities. In fact, that is not the case. In Scott Loss's paper, he found that 56% of all collisions take place at buildings under 11 stories. 44% of the remaining collisions, that's, if you can do math, you're like, that's basically 100%. One is homes 1 to 3 stories. So 44% of all collisions take place at residences, and only less than 1% take place at high rises. And part of this is individual high rises can be very dangerous for birds, but they're fairly rare on the landscape as compared to homes and low-rise buildings, which cumulatively then are killing far more birds every single year. And one thing to keep in mind, though, is that even at high-rise buildings, collisions are mostly taking place at the lower stories. Think about it as, the stat that we're all most likely to get into a car accident within a couple miles of home. Birds are most likely to collide with windows where they are most active. So these birds aren't necessarily bouncing off of buildings at night. They are coming in, they're coming into the vegetation surrounding the buildings. They're most active in the understory. They're most active to the tree canopy, and that is where they're hitting buildings the most. And just to drive this point home, this is a belted kingfisher that I found in the great state of New Jersey while I was visiting my grandparents. I was sitting on the porch with my grandmother, and I heard this whack, like this huge thunk. I was like, what was that? And she's like, oh, sounds like a bird hit the window. I was like, all right, we're gonna come back to why you know that sounds so well, but I'm gonna run outside and try to find this bird. And I went across the street and I found this kingfisher right in front of, on a driveway, in front of the window that it hit. And think in your head of maybe what window you think that bird hit. Maybe it looked like the picture window in the picture I showed in the very beginning. Nope. That center little window right over top of the center garage door, that's the window that bird hit. Even tiny panes of glass, if they are reflective, if birds think that they are habitat, those can be extremely deadly. That bird did not survive. What species are most at risk? So the majority of collisions appear to be songbirds. So we've got a pile there. This is my desk at NYC Bird Alliance. I had a lot of these birds there. You can see we've got thrushes, warblers, lots of sparrows. All of these are nocturnal migrants. They, again, aren't typically hitting buildings at night while they're migrating, but they migrate. They run this gamut of North America twice a year. Light draws them into our cities, into the proximity of buildings. They need stopover habitat, and often that stopover habitat is in close proximity of windows. And when they get up, when they're foraging, when they're active the next day, that's when they're hitting windows. I will say that there is some bias to this. You find dead birds where you look for dead birds. And a lot of big cities like Chicago and New York have collision monitoring programs that go out during the spring and fall. So of course, that's when they're finding the most birds. As we start to look closer, in some places, we find that they actually have the most collisions in winter. And in places, especially at homes, especially homes with feeders, that's where we see lots of winter collisions. The Pacific Northwest, they tend to have most of their collisions in the winter. So we're finding differences in these patterns. I suspect that here in Fort Collins, I have a suspicion that there are probably a lot of winter collisions since we don't have that really heavy songbird migration through here twice a year. But that's, my speculation, not necessarily fact. So why do birds hit glass? And eventually I did go back to my stepmom and I was like, I learned for my job, these birds are not stupid. They're not flying into glass because they're dumb. Birds don't see glass, but neither do people. We think we see glass. But if we saw glass, would there be a need for signs like this? It says the sole purpose of this sticker is to prevent people from walking into this glass door, right? A lot of us probably know somebody who has hit a glass door before. Glass is made to be clear. It's made to be see-through. We don't see the glass itself. We see the things surrounding the glass. We see door handles, signs, mullions, smudges on the glass, all kinds of things, these architectural cues that lead us to know and expect glass to be present. If you take those cues away, we will also hit glass. Unfortunately, most birds you can't explain architecture to. And we can use this as an example. So if we look at this picture, is this a picture of trees? Is this a picture of trees reflected in glass? Is this a picture of trees seen through glass? It's really hard to tell, but if you back up, well, now we know glass is involved in some way. We can see a crack, we can see the colors a little off, we can see those mullions. And then if we back up all the way, now we can tell these are trees reflected in glass. Birds take things literally. So here's a video I love to show because it's always fun to show people walking into glass, but that's kind of unfair. So I want to show the opposite. This is my favorite prank video of all time. You can make someone think glass is present by putting the architectural cues in place. Right? I love it. It's like such a wholesome prank. I love it. So birds, on the other hand, they take things literally. The trees reflected in that building, those are trees. The trees seen through to the atrium of the building, those are trees. There's no barrier between them and that habitat that they're trying to fly to. And unfortunately, when we hit glass, generally, we kind of bounce off, we might have a bump or a cut or a scrape. The thing injured the most is our ego. But unfortunately, small songbirds can pick up speeds really, really quickly, and they hit very, very hard, and their bodies are not able to handle that kind of impact. So light exacerbates this issue. So a lot of times, lights out programs are incredible. They're great. Light exacerbates the issue. It is not the main cause of collisions in most cases. Light is a predictor of migratory bird stopover. I think you all probably saw a presentation at one point from Dr. Kyle Horton at CSU. That was one of his papers recently. So light is bringing birds into close proximity of our cities and of our built infrastructure. Beacon type lights like the 9/11 Tribune light that's shown here can attract and disorient migratory birds. They actually get trapped in those lights and will circle and circle. And birds can be more likely to hit lit windows at night in certain circumstances. But the one study that this was done on was a single building in a city. And so it's not necessarily the case. And it does seem like at homes, most of the collisions are happening during the day, not at night. So if you turn your lights off at night, that's awesome. Birds will be less likely to be attracted into close proximity, but light is not the main solution to preventing collisions. So finding solutions, again, there are tons of solutions. We know so much about this. So much of what we've learned about collisions are from collision monitoring programs, from experimental field setups, from bird vision research and modeling, from flight tunnels, from case studies. And when we put this all together, we are able to make recommendations of what kinds of patterns, what kinds of products will work to make glass not dangerous to birds anymore. Material, spacing, color, reflectivity, coatings, all kinds of cool stuff. ABC also has a tunnel test. This is the materials testing that I mentioned. I could give a whole presentation on this, so I'm just going to touch on it here. But we have flight tunnels at 2 banding stations on the East Coast of the United States, in Pittsburgh and in Maryland. And These birds, after birds are banded, they are flown in our flight tunnel and given a choice. So when the birds are put in this end of the tunnel, they fly down, and what they see at the end is this. This is a pane of glass, or two panes of glass. On one side is the glass being tested. It'll often have a pattern on it that we are testing. On the other side is the control. When birds fly down that, they want to exit this tunnel, and they make a choice between which pane of glass they're going to attempt to go through to exit. There is a fine net in front of the glass, so they don't hit the glass. They bounce off unharmed and are immediately released. And we think, or we've seen evidence that if birds are avoiding the test pane and going to the control, to the clear glass, that means they are seeing the pattern on that glass and they're choosing to avoid it. And that type of glass, that product, is likely to prevent collisions in the real world. So all of this research taken together, these are the basics of collision prevention. I'm going to go through some actual products that you can go out and buy today if you want to, or probably not today. But maybe tomorrow. But I want to go through some of the principles of prevention, because you can get really creative and DIY this if you just know how to do it. So how do we make glass bird friendly? A lot of times I say this, people say this, we make glass visible to birds. We're actually not making the glass visible to birds. They still don't know the glass is there. We're putting markers on the glass that birds see and avoid. So birds don't know the glass is present, but they see a marker that is a solid barrier, and they know that they can't fly through that and they will avoid it. So what we have to think about is, how do we make these elements of this pattern visible to birds? How do we make it so that they avoid these elements of the pattern, so they avoid the glass pane entirely? And we can even make buildings like this. This is a very concerning building to me, these mirrored cabins in the woods or in the desert. But we can even make a building like this bird friendly by putting markers on the glass that birds see and avoid. So how do we do that? Well, we think about two things. One, bird vision. So birds, their eyes are on the sides of their heads. Well, the songbirds that are main collision victims, versus our eyes in the front of our head. So we kind of see everything in front of us. The world is something we see in front of us that we're walking and moving into. Birds, eyes on the side of their head, big blind spot from the beak in front of their head. Birds, and they're moving quickly. It's really, think about it as birds are moving through space, and they're experiencing the world as something that they are moving through very quickly. Birds also see different colors than we do. A lot of birds can see in UV. I'll talk about UV again in a minute. And the one way that their vision is actually worse than ours, that our vision is better than theirs, is contrast sensitivity. So we've got this image with these black and white lines, and as they get closer and closer together, they start to just fade into a gray mush. We can see those distinct lines further along that spectrum than birds can. Their contrast sensitivity is just not as good as ours. So something has to be more contrasty for them to be able to see it, if that makes sense. And then, of course, bird behavior. Birds are typically doing a different thing when they're navigating an open sky. They're probably on the lookout for predators behind them, versus navigating a cluttered pathway like through a tree. And we know that songbirds can really fit through some crazy spaces, like this barn swallow shown in the picture all the way left. Sorry, it's mirrored here. So what makes these elements visible to birds? One, spacing. Spacing is super important because we think about the pattern, the elements of the pattern themselves. Birds are looking at the spacing. They're thinking, all right, there's something there I can't fly to. There's something there I can't fly through. Are those things too close for me to fit? I should fly away. So the spacing matters the most. The rule is 2 inches by 2 inches apart for dots, or 2-inch spacing for lines. You might know, or maybe have heard the 2x4 rule in the past. We generally said something like the palm of your hand. So the spacing this way should be 2 inches and this could be 4 inches. But we were finding that hummingbirds, kinglets, other tiny birds were still colliding with windows. And so that has been reduced to 2x2. And if we can prevent collisions for the smallest birds, we can also then prevent collisions for every bird that is larger than that. Second, contrast. Color is important. Contrast is important. We recommend black and white. As you can see, there are different colors of tape on this window here, and those, the translucent lines, the gray lines really blend in, whereas the black and white lines stand out a little bit better. So we really need to keep in mind that contrast sensitivity. And it kind of depends on your background, as you can see in this picture. When you have a complex background like the trees, the black really blends into it, or and white really stands out. If you have something that is just blue sky, black is going to stand out and white is really going to blend in. So it's kind of good to look at what's your window reflecting to figure out what the best thing to put in. So lines that are thicker are going to be more visible. We recommend 1/8 inch lines and 1/4 inch dots. So these elements of the pattern themselves can actually be pretty small, but the spacing has to be fairly tight. So, and the last thing, it's got to be on the outside of the glass. This is a tough part, and it might mean that you have to hire somebody to install a product on the second or third story of your building, because as you can see in the picture on the, actually kind of both of them, both of these pictures, there's a really heavy reflection on this window, and there are alternating lines inside and outside the glass in black on one side and white on the other. And you can tell that the lines that are on the inside just really disappear. Those reflections on the exterior of the window completely obscure them. And if the birds can't see it, they're not going to avoid it, and they're still going to hit that window. And there was actually a study done with one product that did in a flight tunnel that did show that products put on the inside of the glass are not effective. So again, these rules, you can do anything you want as long as it has 2 by 2 spacing, 1/8 inch lines, 1/4 inch dots, high contrast, and is put on the outside of the glass. A lot of people like dots. I like lines personally. All right. So practical solutions for prevention. I'm going to go through some products that you can use. It's going to go from DIY to commercially available products that are a little more expensive. The aesthetics are going to be very different. Availability is going to be very different. Hopefully there's something that works for you. All of these products and rules, I want to say, are available on ABC's website, which is listed here. I'm going to put this up again at the end, and I also have a quick link at the end, but birdsmartglass.org will take you to the ABC Collisions website, and you can navigate to this page. All right. Where to start? So you don't have to fix every window on your home right away. You first fix any windows where you've seen or heard a bird hit. Fix any windows near feeders or fruit trees. Fix any windows with vegetation reflected. Monitor, see if birds are still hitting. Add another window. Monitor, see if birds are still hitting. Add another window. It's like triaging your windows. You don't necessarily have to do every single window in your home, at least not right away. And there are tons of options. What doesn't work? Single hawk decals don't work. If you imagine that 2 by 2 spacing rule, birds don't see this as a hawk. They don't think it's a predator, or if they do initially, they very quickly realize that it is not, in fact, a real predator. They are going to fly in this picture probably to above or to the left or to the right of the decal that is on that glass door. If you already have decals like this and you want to make them work, I say cut them up into little pieces about 1/4 inch big and spread them out all across your window. And so technically, I guess hawk decals can work, but you got to do that. Moving your bird feeders is unfortunately not going to work. There has been sort of this myth that you can put a feeder really close to a window and birds can't pick up enough speed to hit it. That is not the case, especially if a bird is scared into a window from predators. Songbirds are fast, and those birds can still collide with that window and severely injure or kill themselves. So no safe distance. If you have bird feeders, you really should have collision prevention up. It's just not fair to attract birds into a dangerous place. We're doing them a disservice by doing that. And finally, blinds. Blinds tend not to work because they are on the interior of the window, so the reflection is going to obscure them. And in some cases, depending on the reflection and the color of the blinds, if you close your blinds, you can actually intensify reflections and make it worse. So just some myth busting. So what does work? Insect screens. Insect screens are the best collision prevention. I was very fortunate that our house here in Fort Collins came with window screens, so I didn't have to worry about it. Unfortunately, modern buildings tend to not be made with window screens, so this can be tough, but if this is an option for you, I highly recommend it. Paint. Paint is a great option. Tempera paint, paint pens. You can paint a design on the exterior of your windows. You can get really artistic with it, or I'd probably do something more like those squiggly lines in the middle. And this also works really well if you just want to temporarily prevent collisions while you find a more elegant solution for your windows. It will eventually rub off, but it's also a really great art project for schools, for nature centers, having people do really cool murals. I've seen this done really, really well, including in that University of British Columbia picture there. And you don't have to be an artist. You can even get like rollers with patterns on them. As long as your pattern spacing is 2 by 2, you're good to go. So this cheap, easy, simple. There's another one. All right, Acopian bird savers. This is essentially parachute cords hung spaced 4 inches apart. The 4-inch spacing works here because it's 3D and off the window. We find that it does work, but if you have a lot of hummingbirds, you might want to space them a little bit closer to be safe. This is a great DIY option, and you can also, Acopian Bird Savers, their website has instructions for making your own, as well as if you'd rather just purchase them. Essentially, you mount them above your windows and they hang in front of it. And we see this a lot at homes and nature centers, but I've actually seen some commercial installations of this product recently, which is pretty cool. Bird crash preventers are essentially fishing line hung in front of windows at a 2-inch spacing. This actually works fairly well. Of course, some people don't like it because you are putting more plastics, more fishing line. They will eventually break down in sunlight. So, but definitely a great option. Decals. A lot of the decals that are sold, including things that are sold at shops here in Fort Collins, are sold but not generally used and in the correct spacing, and they don't have the correct spacing recommendations on them. The correct spacing is much, much closer, and these decals are really big, and so when you space them close enough together, you're covering a ton of your window. So again, cut them up into smaller pieces and then spread them over your window, and they'll be just as effective, and you'll have a better view out. Tape is a great option. You can get, ABC has a product called bird tape available, but you can use any kind of tape on the exterior of a window as long as it's the right size and spacing. You can make cool patterns with it. You can combine it with decals. I really love the hawk decal plus stripes here. Here's another option. These are old pictures, so these actually have the 2 by 4 spacing. I need new pictures of tape. So if you do put tape on your windows and it's working for you and you want to send me a picture to use in my presentations, I would love it. Thank you. This is a picture from an ABC member and Cornell Feeder Watch participant, Donna. She sent me this because she started doing Feeder Watch. She has all these feeders. She loves watching and feeding the birds, and she was getting about a collision a week. And those were just the collisions she knows about, because we know that they happen more than we know about. And so she went out and she bought a product called Art Tape on Amazon, and she put it out on her window in the correct spacing, and no more collisions since. And she said that her and her husband have no problems viewing the birds through the glass, and they really like the look of it, and they really like it because they know how much it's helping. Feather Friendly is a product. This is little vinyl dots in the correct spacing. It goes on like a film, and then you peel off the backing and just the dots remain on the outside. Feather Friendly is great. It really disappears. As you back up from that window, as you pass by it every morning with your coffee, you start to just not notice it. I heard a story where they put Feather Friendly on a building, and then they asked the people who were working in the office what they thought of the decals on the building. And they said, "What decals?" They didn't even know that they were there. Kaleidoscape White, this is like bus wrap. This is great if you're actually have a security concern or a solar gain concern. You're trying to actually make a window so that you can't see into it, but that you can still see out. I don't know if you've ever been on a bus that has like a big printed ad on the outside and you can kind of see out the perforations. That's essentially what this product is. This is also a great product for those territorial collisions. You can put this on your window until that cardinal decides that he's going to leave you alone. All right. Feather Friendly also has a commercial product, so you can get this commercially, professionally installed if you'd rather not DIY it. Bird Divert is a UV product. It's almost just like Feather Friendly, except it is a UV dot instead of an opaque white dot. It's pretty cool. It kind of looks like raindrops on the glass. Like you can kind of still see it even though it's UV. But I do want to give a disclaimer for any UV products. One, not all birds can see UV. Hawks, raptors can't see UV, and doves, pigeons cannot see UV. So to those birds, it's like you didn't do anything. So it really depends on what's colliding with your windows. And in order for birds to be able to see these UV dots, the dots have to be able to reflect UV light back at the bird's eyes, which means it has to be receiving UV light. So if there's a deep overhang, if it's in deep shade, if these windows aren't getting a ton of sun, there just might not be enough contrast for the birds to be able to see it. And I have seen products like this installed in places not work, and then they have to put something else over top of it. So UV can be a great option, but consider it carefully and whether it's good for your situation. And if you have questions, you can email me. Solex is another full film. It's got stripes on it. I like the stripes personally. I don't know. It's my personal preference. And these guys are about to come out with a ton of new options, so keep an eye on them. Netting can work, but netting always leaves you the possibility of actually injuring birds because they could get caught in it. It has to be kept taut. So I recommend netting with hesitation. It can work really well, but the maintenance is pretty high just to make sure you're not doing more harm than good. Solar shades are a great option. Anything in front of the glass, a shade, a screen, something like that is a great option. Lights out, use that in conjunction with bird-friendly glass or retrofits, not instead of it. We recommend Dark Sky International as a really excellent resource for how to minimize artificial light at night using curfews, shielding, motion sensors, avoiding uplighting, things like that. They're a great resource. Again, here's our website with everything I just listed in case you were not taking notes, but I do see a lot of people taking notes, so thank you very much. And real quick, I'm just going to touch on this briefly, but scaling up. If every single person fixed their home windows, we would take care of 44% of collisions until more homes were built. And we see the homes that are being built here at least, and they look like bird killers to me. And we still have commercial buildings and we still have new development. And so really we want to go beyond just our own windows. And so some ways you can help is get involved in local efforts. Lights Out Denver, Lights Out Colorado are great options. I don't believe there are any collision monitoring programs out here, but you can still report collisions you find in one of these 3 databases. If you use iNaturalist, you can report dead birds. You can go to dbird.org, play on eBird, but for dead birds. And you can report dead birds to, guys, I was on the team that made dBird. I'm gonna tell them you said that. So dBird is, it's where you can report incidental collisions. I know Denver Audubon was using it to track collisions in Denver, and anyone can use these, and anyone can go to dBird and look at reports in their area to see where birds are being reported. And a similar app is Global Bird Collision Mapper. This is from Flap Canada, but it does still work in the US, and it's very similar to dBird in that way. So reporting collisions is a great way to get involved. You can advocate for retrofits if you know of a commercial building that might, or a government building that might be killing birds. You can monitor, build a coalition of people who care to talk to the building owner or manager to educate them on this issue. Make your ask, say, hey, can we put some retrofits up on these windows and see how they do? It takes a lot of patience and persistence, but there have been some really great stories of this working. This is a hotel in New York City that was retrofit. You can see the feather-friendly dots, especially over top the door. You might have heard, I'm just curious, has anyone heard of the story at McCormick Place in Chicago? Yeah. So a couple of years ago, 1,000 birds hit that building in a single night, and it was a media firestorm. It was awesome. It was great. People were mad. And it's interesting, but it took 1,000 birds hitting in a night for this to happen. There was a group that had been monitoring this for decades. This building killed 40,000 birds before it killed those 1,000 birds. But after that pressure from those birds, they undertook a renovation. They put feather friendly on all of those windows. And in the first season of monitoring, collisions were reduced by something like 95%. So huge success story. You can advocate for new bird-friendly construction. So if you know a new building is going up and you're like, oh, these renderings look bad, you kind of follow the same steps, get involved, talk to the developers, make your voice heard. This is the first bird-friendly stadium in the country. This is the Milwaukee Bucks Stadium. And it took my colleague Brian like 4 years of advocating to get this building done. But it's really setting an example for stadiums, and we're hoping to see more bird-friendly stadiums come out of this. And finally, really the best way to address collisions at a large scale is to pass bird-friendly policies. These can be organizational, like colleges. You can have an agency agree that all their new buildings are going to be bird-friendly, or of course, municipal legislation. So far, we've seen 28 municipalities in the US pass mandatory bird-friendly ordinances. And we have resources on how to talk to your city council people. We have a model ordinance if you're interested in getting involved in passing bird-friendly policies. And I would really love to see something like this get passed in Colorado, in one of our cities here. And I feel like Boulder and Fort Collins are really ready for it. So these are the existing ordinances right now. We are adding more to this list every single year. It's incredibly exciting. And with that, ABC is here to help. We are a resource. There's my email address. There's that birdsmartglass.org website where all of our resources are available. And with that, I will take your questions. Thank you so much. Thank you.
The question comes from the room. Could you repeat the question? People on Zoom. And secondly, look over there every now and then to see if Joe's got any questions on Zoom.
All right, will do. So questions? Yes.
I have a comment and a question. There's actually a club at CSU that's actually monitoring all the bird collisions and stuff.
I'm the team lead for the Windows Strike Survey, or at least I was for the last 8 years.
Nice to meet you. I had no idea.
Yeah, so
I just want to say to the audience on Zoom, CSU has a team monitoring window strikes.
we do. I don't know who's, the ball has been passed to somebody else, so I don't know who's currently running it. But during my 8 years as tenure, we collected something like 900 dead birds. Our data is very similar to the data that was published in 2014, showing mostly small birds. Our biggest season for window strikes is winter here in Colorado. Our research basis was only focused on CSU campus though, so we have no information on the rest of Fort Collins. Highlighted birds that we got. We had one great horned owl collision at the Morgan Library. The owl did not survive. But and our #1 species for most common birds to strike a window was the Audubon's warbler.
Audubon's warbler.
Like
Also,
yellow warbler.
yeah, so for those on Zoom, 900 dead birds over the years, mostly small songbirds, Audubon's warbler, top species, great horned owl hit once. Tough. Yes.
And actually, can you put back up that website? I need to write it down still.
Yes. Oh, it's actually right there also.
Okay.
Yep, birdsmartglass.org.
In your policy work, you work on trying to override homeowners association comments.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that you've suggested that my homeowners association would not let you do.
The question was, in our policy work, do we override, or we work to override homeowners associations? Because the commenter said that a lot of these select suggestions would not be allowed from by their HOA. That is actually not something that we have run into in the past or a concern that has been raised before. So thank you for raising it. I would say, I'm guessing that it basically would have to be a near invisible or a near invisible solution in order to be allowed by the HOA. Is that the case?
Well, I don't know all the exact details, but there's all these rules about that you can't do reflective things, there's just all kinds of stuff that you can't do. And some of those kinds of restrictions, that, for instance, there was a restriction you couldn't have outdoor clotheslines. Well, the city of Fort Collins overrode that. They said that was not in the public interest to, disallow that. So it seems like one way around this would be get the city to say, okay, it's not in the public interest to not allow these kinds of solutions to bird collisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't have an answer for you. We've not come up against that. We've not had that concern brought to us. You're the first person that's ever said, hey, I don't think my HOA would allow these. We do try to offer, such a variety of options that there's something that could squeak in under the HOA rules. But that's definitely something I'm gonna look into more now that you brought it up. So I appreciate it. Yeah.
What about the durability of these in terms of how many years can you expect the window films to last in a climate which has extremes, which more and more areas are very hot in the summer and very cold in the winter. And I can't believe these can last too many years before they have to be replaced.
Yeah, so the question is about durability and warranting of these products on windows, especially in climate extremes. My understanding is that the professional, the window films, so the feather friendly, the bird divert, the Solex film are typically warranted for about a decade. That's how long they will guarantee them. It depends on the company, but there are installations of these products that have lasted far longer, like double that and more. So they are fairly durable. To be fair, I haven't tested any of them in like this specific climate with so much UV exposure. So I think it's really going to depend on the solution, but generally companies with professional products will typically guarantee them for 10 years. I have heard that some of the decals break down in only like a year, like the window alert and the window gems will break down in about a year. So those will need to be replaced regularly. Yeah.
So this is kind of a question on like surveying techniques. So our program did a very different surveying technique than most surveyors that go around buildings. We did kind of we had like a hotline that if somebody spotted a bird, they would call us. Has anyone like figured out which is the best method to try to figure out window strikes? Like routine walking versus having somebody call whenever they find one?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is about collision monitoring or collision survey techniques, whether it's better to have people walking around buildings or maybe just call. I would say whatever technique works for your team is great. How you do it, the way you can analyze and use that data in the future will depend on how you collected those data. So if you want a real scientific study where you can publish before and after monitoring retrofits, you really need the effort data associated with the survey. So you really need to survey and you need to record how many people looked, how long they looked, when they looked. But if you are new to this, you're just getting started, you don't have a team available, the incidental collision surveys, which is sort of like having people just report one when they find it, is a really great way to get data when otherwise you might not be able to get it. And it can still be used to convince someone to put a retrofit in place. It can be used to identify hotspots and then plan your formal surveys. And a lot of places, like New York City Bird Alliance, when I worked there, we did both. So we had formal surveys and we used dBird, and they really work well together. In the end, it's just, what's your question? What are you trying to do with your data? And that'll help inform what kind of survey you should do. Are there any questions on the Zoom? No? Anyone else? Sure.
Kaitlyn, have you seen any examples of where incentives or financial assistance has been provided for retrofits?
That is a great question. So the question is, have I seen any examples where incentives or financial assistance has been provided? Often, no. I do know that there have been crowd raising campaigns for collisions for a couple of buildings. I don't currently know of anyone like granting money to retrofit buildings. A lot of times these worst buildings are commercial buildings that people are like, well, you have the money and you just don't want to spend it. But I would really love to see more granting programs, especially for nonprofit buildings or homeowners that have windows. Unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot of that. Something that I think could be explored more and that our team is looking into, it would be like legislated tax incentives for retrofits. And currently there is one bill in the New York State legislature that would provide a tax credit for a building that retrofits its windows. Of course, it hasn't been passed. I'm not sure what the support level is for something like that right now, but that's also something that I think is worth exploring.
One more.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm asking on behalf of all those people who might hesitate at putting anything on their windows that diminishes their view of some scenery. And with that preface, I'm wondering if you could put into perspective that just you gave us the numbers of bird window collisions, an estimate. Can you put that in perspective with all of the threats out there that have led to steep declines in North American bird populations?
Yeah.
Like if we tackle this one,
Yeah.
give us the pitch.
So let me try to repeat that back. Sort of, yeah, what's the pitch? Put into context, like in terms of threats to birds, how big this is.
Yeah.
So window collisions are the second largest direct cause of bird mortality in the United States. Second only to feral and free roaming cats, which are another order of magnitude larger, but it is the second largest direct threat. Of course, we have, climate and for deforestation, habitat loss, and all of these other things. But in terms of direct mortality to birds, this is a pretty significant number. And it's sort of that straw that broke the camel's back thing, where for certain species, for uncommon species, for species of conservation concern, if they're dealing with habitat loss and they're dealing with climate change and all of these other issues, cat predation, and then window collisions on top of that, these cumulative effects of all these things are really significant. And again, this is something that we can prevent. You can directly save individual birds, give them a chance to continue migration, to get up into the boreal forest, to reproduce, for them and then all their young to come south again through in the winter, only to repeat it again every single year. We can directly save individual birds, and I just think that's really significant. And if you are concerned about the aesthetics, get a couple samples. These companies will send you a sample. Put it on your window and see how you feel about it. Put it on your glass door and see if the bird divert UV dots don't bother you after a couple days. And I think a lot of people would be surprised that it just becomes an everyday part of your life. And then when your friends come over, you point it out to them, and maybe they'll put dots on their windows, and then their friends will put dots on their windows. And I think we can all just make a really huge collective difference for birds. We got more.
I just
Yeah.
I just have one question. All of these prevention measures have to be put on the outside.
Yes, they do all need to go on the outside of the window.
Just to build on John's question and point, has there been, so we need to make this, seems like to me, going forward, we need to make these window treatments the norm. And So for the particular cities that were listed up there that have these ordinances for bird-friendly glass in place, was there a particular campaign or technique to convince the city to put those in place? Because we can do that nationwide.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's a great question. So in these cities that have policies and ordinances normalizing collision mitigation, I would say that really every city has been a slightly different case study in what works. So in New York City, it was a city council leader who really cared about animals and animal rights. It was the right political climate, and it was someone who knew about this issue, who knew that city council person, and it all snowballed from there. But in other cities, there's been organizations making noise for years, for decades, and there's still resistance. So it really depends on the city. And I will say we talk a lot, there actually has been legislation introduced into the US House that will require federal buildings. I don't expect that we're gonna see a lot of movement at the federal level in the near future. So I think that we're gonna continue to see this snowball effect of small municipalities, but honestly, I think a lot of this is there's a concerned group of citizens who educate their legislators who just have no idea that this is an issue. And once they do start to care about it. So we actually have a publication that's a case study of 5 different cities and how they got their legislation passed. It's on our resources. That might be an interesting, resource in terms of that.
It certainly won't be scientific, but would you put that list back up? It wasn't up for, because we probably all have ideas that
This
kind of know that's what I meant. Yeah, just, I don't claim it helps very much, but maybe it's kind of interesting to a lot of us to see that.
Yes, Jesse.
Can you address, if you do come upon a bird that is still breathing, what can you do for the bird to possibly help it survive?
Yeah, so if you do come across an injured bird, what to do? So typically, the current recommendation is if you have a wildlife rehabilitator near you that you can get that bird to pick up that bird, put it in a paper bag, which is the best bird ambulance there is because they don't bounce around in it, they can't further injure themselves, and get that bird to a rehabilitation center as fast as possible. They're finding that early and quick anti-inflammatory medication can really bring down, a lot of it is brain bleeding and swelling. That's kind of the cause of death. I would say that if there is no rehabilitator near you, still pick that bird up, get it off the street so that it doesn't get predated, put it into a bag, put it into a dark, quiet place until you start to hear it rustling around, until it's back alert, and then you can re-release it. But really getting it to a rehabber is sort of the best thing you can do, because though we found that so many birds die in rehab, it's giving them the best chance, and we owe it to those birds to give them the best chance to survive.
And this is the topic of our March program.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
come back for even more helpful advice.
Yes.
We have 2 Zoom questions. The first is asking for clarification on the spacing for the Acopian bird savers. Is that needed to be less than 4.5 inches?
Yeah, so this question is about the Acopian bird. Well, I guess they're on Zoom, they can see the question. So Acopian bird savers are generally sold and recommended at a 4-inch spacing, which is bigger than the 2 inches we usually recommend. They do tend to be effective at that spacing, and we're not sure if maybe it's because of the movement, because they're set off the window in 3D, though I would recommend spacing them closer than 4 inches if you live in an area that has lots of small birds. If hummingbirds are your primary collision victim at your house, space them a little smaller just to be safe, or at least keep an eye on them and make sure that they're effective at the 4-inch spacing.
And then another one is, you mentioned that samples are possible from the companies that provide these. Is there a way to get those samples to educational outreach programs?
Yeah, a lot of these companies will donate materials for educators, will give you samples of products that you can take to tabling events, that you can have at nature centers, that you can have at outreach events. If you go to our website, that How to Prevent Collisions at Home, we have direct links to a lot of these companies and their products, and you can contact the companies directly from there. And just let them know you heard about it. You can mention me, you can mention ABC, tell them, you really want to have these materials available. They're trying to, they both really care about birds and they're trying to sell products. So they're often willing to donate some materials to people who are potential leads. Yes.
I think you mentioned that one of the best ways to kind of maybe one of the most reliable ways to prevent bird collisions is to provide screens on the outside of the windows. So is that a screen that's just outside the window like other screens are normally, like a sliding glass door screen, or is it something that's even further away?
Nope, just a typical sliding glass door screen or a typical insect screen that fits into your window if you have those, as long as it's on the outside of the glass. What it's doing there is essentially totally cutting that reflection and just not making that window something a bird would want to fly to. It also, because it's a little further off the glass, it's soft. If you do end up with a bird colliding with it, they're less likely to injure themselves. But really, if you look at a window screen and a window without a screen, you'll see that those reflections just totally disappear with the insect screens in place. Yeah, and you can, if you don't have window screens on your windows, I've seen where you can get screens that kind of stretch out and suction cup onto the outsides of your windows. So you can actually get something even if your house isn't necessarily built to have insect screens. Yes.
Following up on that, if you have windows that have the arched transoms or rectangular transoms over top, you have the screens in, you would still put dots or tape on the transoms as well, because the narrow spaces the birds can try to.
Yes, correct. So if you have insect screens, but you've got small transom windows, kind of like that kingfisher house picture, just those transom windows can still be really dangerous. And we have also found that sometimes if you fix a window and birds, they'll stop colliding with that window, but they end up colliding with other windows nearby now because they don't collide with that one, they avoid it, but they think maybe that transom over top is still an escape route. So yeah, you definitely still want to put the dots on the exterior of those little tiny windows. One of the worst windows at a building in New York City that had a huge glass curtain wall was actually on the entire other side of the building. It was maybe 3 feet by 3 feet, and there was a row of 3 of them that reflected the trees perfectly. And I found far more dead birds there than at the glass curtain wall around the corner. So those tiny windows can be deadly. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Kaitlyn, thank you so much.
That was a fantastic presentation. I know we all learned a lot. Thank you. Thank you for your work as well. So I'm glad you all came out. I know the topic can seem a little bit grim, but Kaitlyn made it clear how important it is and gave us ways that we can individually take action. I think our chapter is going to be looking at what we can do maybe community-wide or on a larger scale. And if anybody would be interested in helping out with that, we're always looking for volunteers to help with our conservation committee work and our education committee work. So just get in touch if this topic really resonates with you and you'd like to try to see some progress happen locally. With that, that's going to conclude our meeting. I hope we'll see you next month on the 3rd Thursday, March 20th, for a presentation on what to do if you find an injured or baby bird. And enjoy the rest of your evening. Join me one more time to thank Kaitlyn.